In this lesson, you're going to learn how to find the slope of a line when you are given 2 points on the line, but not the graph. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about how it relates to the change in y coordinates over the change in x coordinates. So if we think about what slope is the rise or the change in y's, rise and y's rhyme, compared to the change in x's. So I'm talking about this one here. Now you can see that they have the same arrows going this way. But let's talk about rise over run. So the vertical change is here. So I'm going to say that that vertical change is going down by 3 units, I think. Let's take a look here. Down 3, so that would be -3, compared to the run, which is to the right, 6. So if we talk about the slope, it's down 3 over 6, and notice that down 3 over 6 is the same as what you see here, up 3 and left 6. So if we go from here, we could go up 3, so that would be positive, and left 6, which would be a -6. So either way you do it, you get -1/2 as the slope. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the coordinates that they gave us. So they found the change in y's by looking at the y values and subtracting them. 3 minus 0. So this is 3 and this is 0. So 3 minus 0 is 3. If you look at the x values, -4 and 2, we're going to subtract those. -4 minus 2 is -6. So that's how they got their answer here. Let's talk about if we did it the opposite way. So if we take 0 first and then subtract 3. So if we do 0 minus 3, we would get -3. If we do 2 minus -4, then I would get 6. So notice that either way I do it, I would get -3 over 6 or +3 over -6. Either one simplifies to -1/2. So it doesn't matter which point you start with and which point you end with. However, we cannot do 3 minus 0 and then do 2 minus -4. That will not work. So whichever one we start with on the top, so if we start with the 3 on top, that's here, then we have to start with the -4 on bottom, which is here. So let's go through some examples. Now you will want to write this down, that the slope formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Real quick, why we want to have those 1's and 2's is that this is a second point that goes together. x2, y2 is a point. This is also a point, x1, y1. Notice that we have 2 points given, so I'm going to call this one the first point and this one the second point. So since I have 2 different points with x's and y's, that's where these little subscript numbers come into play. And then over here, I'm going to write above each one which one I'm calling x1 and y1. So I'm going to call this x1, y1. And then the second point I'll put in a different color, and I'll call that one x2, y2. Alright, so now I'm going to use this formula right here. I'm going to take whatever my y2 is, so here y2 is the 4, minus y1, which is this 2 value here. So I'm going to color code this. So the slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Alright, so now I'm ready to go. My y2 is 4 minus my minus my y1, which is 2, and that's going to be over my x2, which is 2, minus my my x1, which is negative 3. So basically I'm just plugging in the numbers into that formula. It's the change in the y's, so I'm subtracting the y's, over the change in the x's. So let's go ahead and figure this out. The answer to this would be 4 minus 2 is 2, and 2 minus negative 3 is 5. So my answer is 2/5 for the slope. Now let's go through this a little bit faster on this next one. I'm going to call this first point x1, y1, and the second point is going to be x2, y2. And I'm ready to plug in numbers. So y2 minus y1, so negative 5 minus y1, which is 1, over x2, which is 8, minus x1, which is 6. And now I'm ready to solve. So negative 5 minus 1 is negative 6, and 8 minus 6 is 2. Now, on the last problem, I was done at this point. 2 over 5 was my answer, but this time I'm going to simplify. I always want to simplify if possible. So my final answer is negative 3. So my slope is negative 3, which tells me I know that my line is going to go down from left to right, and over here with the 2/5, my line would go up from left to right because it's a positive slope that we learned about yesterday. One more example. So I'm going to call this one x1, y1, and then the second point I'm going to call x2, y2. And I'm ready to plug numbers in. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So if I do the math there, 4 minus 4 is 0, and 1 minus negative 2 is 3. Now 0 over 3 is possible. Remember, we can't have a 0 in the bottom, but we can have it in top. So my answer is 0. And from what you learned yesterday, and I sang it, horizontal has slope of 0. So that tells me my slope is 0, so I'm going to have a horizontal line. And that is the end of the topic, of this section.